Hello, everybody. We should be going live here in just a minute. I just wanted to give our stream a chance to come up and stabilize and do its thing. Get this mic out of my face just a little bit. We have Mr. Neal Acree tonight. He is a pretty renowned composer for some major video games, so I think you guys are going to enjoy this. All right, we're not dropping frames. We seem to be in good shape. I just grab my glasses here, folks. Hello.
Hi, Chris.
Hi. Thank you for being willing to sit down and meet with me a week afterwards. I'm sorry we had a little issue last week.
Not a problem.
I don't know if Michelle passed it on. I had a catastrophic computer failure earlier in the day. I was like, oh, this is the worst timing ever.
Yeah, there's never a good time for that, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that's for sure. Well, I have the stream all set here. Let me just kick on the recorders and we can get started. All right, we are all set. Well, welcome everybody to GameOnWithMMORPG.com. I am Chris, as always, and we are honored today. We have a special guest, Mr. Neal Acree. Hello, Neal.
Hi, Chris. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's absolutely my pleasure. For folks who may not have heard of you, can you give a brief introduction to yourself and your work?
I'm a composer and done a lot of game work for Blizzard over the last 10 years. I started out in film and television, worked on the Stargate SG-1 series, and in recent years worked on World of Warcraft, Overwatch, StarCraft 2, Diablo 3, and all those lovely games, as well as a Chinese game called Revelation Online, which is coming out fairly soon.
Yeah, I've actually played some Revelation Online, as well as virtually every game you've just named. So
Awesome.
I'm definitely familiar with your work. So, I mean, you have such a body of musical compositions. How did you get involved with media in this way? I mean, was that your goal when you sat down as a young creator that you wanted to get into Hollywood in the video game world and that kind of thing?
Actually, the game thing happened a bit later. I started out wanting to be a film composer, and I mean before that I was a 14-year-old wanting to be a rock star in a rock band, and started playing guitar, and that kind of slowly transitioned into making instrumental music and stuff, and that led to the more I got into it, the deeper into the rabbit hole I went. And found that writing music for movies might be the ultimate outlet for that. And I was a Star Wars fan growing up, so John Williams' music had always been a huge influence. And I thought if I could do that, if I can, move people emotionally the way that his music and the music from movies move people, that would be a amazing thing to do. So, kind of found my way into that slowly, doing student films and all that, and kind of gradually built my way. Then cut to 10 years later, I had done 20 feature films and was a co-composer on Stargate SG-1. And I got an opportunity to demo for a Blizzard game. At the time, I wasn't that familiar with their games. I had definitely heard of them, but I didn't know them as well as I would have liked. But I had the opportunity to audition for a project I didn't know anything about, and later found out it was the opening cinematic for the Burning Crusade, and that was a great introduction into the industry, and I've fallen in love with it ever since.
Wow. So I have to ask because there are so many dreamers out there. How do you actually make that jump to get recognized, to be able to get into feature films? I mean, to get into major video games is one thing, but I know there are just tons of people in college and in high school that would love to do what you do. So how did you do it? How did you make the jump from amateur into the professional world?
That's a great question, and I've asked myself that many times. That what it really is it's an incremental thing. There isn't like an overnight, one day to the next, all of a sudden you've made it. I mean, there are certainly moments like that where there are larger jumps than before, but for me, it's been incremental. I mean, I started by doing a student film for free, and a series of those, and then at some point, someone paid me to do some music, and that led to a relationship that continued to grow, and each project introduced me to new people and built slowly. And the some of the bigger jumps have happened kind of, I've managed to use the momentum I had gained on in one aspect, like the film and TV stuff. I'm sure that helped get me in the door to even be able to audition for Blizzard. And the industry was a little different too. It was a little bit less competition 10 years ago. Still plenty, but a little bit less so. And just kind of in the right place at the right time. And my agent at the time, he did a favor for Blizzard, and they said, as a thank you for helping us out, we'll listen to whoever you have on your roster. And my stuff happened to resonate with them at the time. So, the opportunities come kind of unexpectedly, but they always favor the ones who are prepared. I mean, when they did come to me and give me the opportunity, I was able to pull through and do a demo that resonated with them as well. So I think it's just incremental, working your way slowly to taking any opportunity you get and trying to make the best of every opportunity.
Yeah, and I think in a lot of fields where people rise to prominence, it's a similar thing. There's no magic bullet to get to the top of the ladder. You have to actually climb that ladder. And would you agree that there's a certain amount of luck that comes in with skill also to climbing there, or do you feel that it's more hard work and just dedication before all else to really climb up to the upper echelons of your field?
I still haven't decided if I believe in luck or not, because I wouldn't be where I am without the hard work. There have been moments where the first project I ever did was some neighbors of mine moved in right next door, and I overheard them talking about this movie they were working on. They literally, the opportunity dropped into my backyard, and yeah, I told them, "Hey, I'm a composer. I haven't actually done any movies before, but I have some demo stuff that I've done to scored to other movies, and I can play you something." And they gave me that opportunity. So I imagine there's a certain amount of serendipitous moments that happen. But again, if you have to be ready for them, and you have to be able to pull through and make the best of those opportunities.
Sure. In talking to different people in the games industry, that's mainly what we cover here. We've talked to executives, and there's actually a couple other composers that we've spoken to, and the unifying factor between yourself and all of these people who have really climbed as high as they have is just an incredible amount of passion for what they do. They put their art first, they put their teams first, and that pays off. So when I say luck, I hope that doesn't come across as like, aren't you lucky? Obviously you have worked very, very hard to get where you are, like so many people who are up there. But I think it's important to recognize it, like, all these things that you're saying of being ready, and making that jump, being prepared, putting in all of that effort to get yourself to where you are, to make yourself stand out, because a lot of people just they don't have that, or they don't do that, I guess. So It's such a pleasure to be able to talk with you here because your pedigree in all of the different games you've worked on has just crafted so many experiences for so many people. Just to touch on World of Warcraft for a second before we go into Rend, quite some time ago I played that game and I played it for a very long time, but I had read a book about the psychology of World of Warcraft. And this is around the time that the Burning Crusade was out, and they had talked about the importance of musical cues and how that kind of crafts the experience, and that those are the memorable experiences in the game. Just how important your work actually is to making these experiences what they are. So when you're sitting down and actually crafting them, how do you do that? How do you decide, what is going to work for a given situation that they tell you they need an audio cue for? Like, what's that process like for you?
Well, thank you for all your kind words on that. Basically, it starts out with I gather as much information as possible, and they give me a ton of concept art and kind of story material that gives me a very clear picture of what the zone or what the character or the area of the game is about, and I try to draw as much from that as possible. And with the history, the location, there's a lot of different things that can suggest a certain direction to go. A certain tonality, a certain instrumentation. Is it happy? Is it sad? Is it like Mr. Pandaria was Asian sounding, and Warlords of Draenor was a lot more savage and primal. And so those, once you kind of dial in the basic direction to go, then it's not like you don't have like a completely blank page with nothing to go off of. But I take this information and I kind of put it in the mental blender, and then I kind of start with, just kind of start as simply as possible, working, whether it's a melody or a rhythmic progression or something, and just kind of build from there. And I layer things, different layers on top, and the piece kind of develops fairly, it's more of an intuitive process than an intellectual one. I do try to prepare as much as possible, but ultimately it comes down to it's an emotional reaction to the material that I've studied. So it's really just about kind of finding a starting point and then just reacting to it, in a musical way.
Where is your starting point? When you sit down to write music, do you use a keyboard first, or?
I have a keyboard, and that's connected to a sampler, various samplers, which for anyone that doesn't know, it's basically, a computer will replicate the sound of a violin. When I press a key on the music keyboard, you hear that note played on that instrument, whatever instrument you selected. So I can recreate the sound of the orchestra playing just like as if I was playing a piano. As if you're playing a piano and the sound of the orchestra comes out instead of the piano sound. And you could layer that, record it into a computer in layers, and so each instrument kind of, the orchestration, the piece kind of gets built organically.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And is the keyboard what you would consider your home instrument? I have to imagine you have a number of instruments that you're fluent in at this point, but is that the one you find yourself returning to?
Yeah, I started out on guitar, but I found that keyboard is much easier to write with. For me, at least, it's all the notes are just laid out right there, and they're connected directly to the samples I mentioned, and it's easy to jump from a string section to a flute solo to a brass section. I tend to think, I'm not a great guitar player and I'm not a great keyboard player, but I tend to see the bigger picture more often. I see all the instruments and try to imagine how each of them is being played in the bigger whole of the picture, or the bigger whole of the piece.
Well, that's very interesting. I hope you still rock out on your guitar sometimes. So if you were 14 wanting to be a rock star, you've got to still pick up the guitar every now and then, right?
I do, and I always try to write stuff for myself every once in a while just to be able to play it.
I've played guitar for 17 years, and I couldn't imagine not having a guitar to play after
Hmm.
all this time.
Yeah.
So it's very very similar similar roots there of wanting to be a rock star when I grew up, and I became a third grade teacher, which is about as far from rock star as I think it's possible you can get. But hey,
Rockstar in its own way.
well, thank you for saying that. My students love to see my. I have this Schecter, really really nice, pretty looking electric guitar, and they love it when we do the holiday sing along. So, anyways, I digress. About Rend. So this is a different project from your other work. Can you give us an idea of what Rend the game is about for folks who may not have heard of it?
Yeah, it's a survival game from Frostkeep Studios, who's it's a new company and this is their first game. And it's like I guess you call it a pretty hardcore survival game because it's you really you start from nothing and you have to build your arsenal and everything from what you find around you, and if you get killed you lose all your stuff and your enemies can grab your stuff, and that's a simple way of putting it, but it's sort of this. It's loosely based on the Viking mythology. At least that's how I interpreted it. Where the characters are sort of in this world that's between the mortal world and the divine. So I kind of, for the music, I was kind of picturing this kind of spiritual aspect to it, and that was when you're. I always look for something like some kind of idea to key into to really kind of pull the try to find what's going on beneath the surface, and that was something that really resonated with me.
Hmm. So, how has this process been different for you than the previous games you've worked on?
Well, good question. It's a lot more of an open discussion about what function the music's going to have in the game. There in cases like Blizzard games, there's a lot of like by the time it gets to me, there's a lot of decisions that have already been made about what's going to have music and where and what the function is, and the game has been going on for so long. Like wow, that everything's kind of the function of the music is very specific. A game like Revelation Online, I was given some very specific needs and requests for specific kinds of music. With Rend, is wide open, and the guys at Frostkeep were they trusted me and said, what do you want to do with this? What function should the music have? And it was a discussion, and we kind of figured out, how the music should interact and how the player should experience it and what role it would have. And it's a fun way to work.
That's interesting. They're a smaller team, I believe, right?
Yes.
So, do you feel that as a composer, as a creative yourself, that it's easier to work with a smaller team because of that?
It's not that much different. I mean, I've definitely find that the passion between the indie developers and the AAA game developers, the passion's the same and wherever you go, and the excitement that people express when they're talking about games and the stories they're making. There's just maybe more people involved on the bigger games, but that's not a bad thing.
Sure.
But it is fun to sorry to interrupt. It is fun to work with a small handful of guys in a room where the entire studio is in this one room, and they're all there's you can feel this passion and excitement about the game, and just talking about all the possibilities and just the feeling of giving them music that they've been working so hard on this for the last year, and getting to put music in there for the first time and really feel it kind of go to the next level and take on a new life. It's exciting to be able to give that to someone.
I imagine, as you said, hear it, go to that next level. The first thing that came to my mind is to feel it come to life. Because
Yeah.
Otherwise, a game without music feels a little dead. It can be a great game, but it's all of the elements coming together that kind of give you the emotional experience. So with this game, it does sound like, as you said, it's a little more of a hardcore survival game than other titles you've worked on in the past. Does that come through in the music at all in terms of, I guess, qualities of aggression or a harsher tone, I would guess?
Yeah, there's a little bit of that. There's these sort of monster attack waves that come periodically, and I made the music very kind of intense and relentless. And then basically that you have these three factions that they're all kind of working towards, who's going to be the first one to ascend to the higher plane of existence. And so there's competition, both to just to survive. Then you're fighting against the other factions, and then you have to fight off these zombie waves. But to answer your question, a lot of it was, I didn't make it like intense and scary at all times. I made it sort of mysterious and ancient and primal, and I wanted to keep the music sort of as unsophisticated, imagining the idea of having to, find sticks to build weapons and to build, your dwelling and all that. I wanted to keep the music very unrefined. So I used a lot of Scandinavian instruments that were, maybe haven't been used for a long time to kind of create this kind of a ancient, and some of these instruments like the hurdy-gurdy or the nickel harp, they kind of have this, a droney kind of sound, or even a resonant sound that happens because there are these strings inside that vibrate as you play. So this kind of buzzy resonant sound creates this sort of a feeling of, it is sort of a more ancient and antiquated sound, but it also has there's a harshness to it. But overall, the idea was to kind of create this feeling of primitive and unrefined music, but do it in a way that was still kind of pleasant to listen to and mysterious.
So how does somebody like yourself come to be able to do that? Because obviously, I'm sure you have a wide academic history, learning instruments and things, studying music, but there's always this jump from, hearing somebody else create music, or really anything, watching somebody else do a task or perform a skill, to being able to do it yourself. I mean, how do you jump into creating music that sounds ancient? I guess you know what I mean. Like there's a big leap there for folks who don't actually do that.
Yeah, and I didn't actually study it. It's more of a kind of with each project. I hear something in my head that, just an idea that starts to form, and as soon as we have a meeting with the game team and people, they kind of describe the game, or sort of they have this passionate discussion about what the game means to them and what happens. I start getting ideas in my head, and usually by the time I drive home, I've already like written a piece in my head. So there's that reaction to the idea. I get very inspired by that, and so then it just becomes a matter of, well, how do I make those sounds become a reality? And in this case, the references to Norse mythology, kind of the first thing I thought was, well, why don't I listen to some Viking funeral music and just kind of see what sounds were used for that kind of thing. And as I start going down that rabbit hole, I pick up a lot of different, just hear a lot of different things that sound interesting, and I say, oh, what's that instrument? Let me look up, where that came from, and see if I can find a player who can play that for me. And then this score was kind of, it wasn't like I was doing a specific, Norse kind of Viking sound. I was going for something that was otherworldly, but also had kind of it was rooted in the past, and had that sort of European ancient folk sound. So it's kind of just drawing a lot of elements together and really just kind of building the sonic palette. Like a painter will get their all their colors together before they start painting. I always do that. I always get all the sounds together that I think are going to work together. And by putting those together, it means I find the samples of them that I can use to play back in my computer. And then once I have something that kind of sounds like it's all going to work, then I go and I find musicians to replay those parts.
when you're imagining the song in your head to start, does it wind up that way? I'm curious because I know a lot of musicians I've spoken to, they'll keep recorders or things like that with them, so they don't lose their ideas. But I know in that creation process, as you're discovering new sounds and new textures and things that you want to put in there, a lot of times you're not you per se, but a lot of times the creative process can change what you originally thought you were doing. Do you find that happens to you, or do you stay pretty close to your original concepts?
Yeah, there's always a lot of change, and I think some of the best stuff I've done has been night and day different than what I originally intended to do, and it just something different comes out, and I often doubt myself and say, "Oh, that's not what I wanted," and I don't even know if that's what the client wants. And oftentimes, if it was something that did from the heart and really poured my soul into, then regardless of whether it was exactly what they wanted, then oftentimes it'll be something that they didn't expect, but ended up liking more.
That passion comes through, in just your own ear for what's going to sound good and fitting. So after you've written everything down, you say you find musicians to go and play this. So the scores that we hear in like your previous body of work, World of Warcraft, Overwatch, Diablo, Rend, are these being played by a team of musicians, or how often do we hear, say, an orchestra versus something that's done using computer software?
A lot of what I do is with an orchestra, and I'm very fortunate because that's really why I got into this in the first place, to be able to work with orchestra, and it's an incredible feeling to have a whole group of people playing something that I wrote. And then some of the projects that the budget doesn't allow for it, or maybe just stylistically, we're kind of going for a different sound. We tend to focus more on different instruments. Like in this case with Rend, the sounds were a lot more intimate and soloistic.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, one of the coolest things about Rend was I had became familiar with a group called Wardruna, which is a Norwegian folk group, and I love their singer named Einar Selvik, and he's done some work on the Vikings TV show, and their music just has this really just kind of ancient primal sound to it that I thought, like, I'd love to write something like that, and I wonder if someone like him would sing on it, because as I was working on the theme for Rend, I thought, I like the idea of using vocals that kind of captures the spirituality I was talking about. Kind of wanted this feeling of like a Viking funeral music with maybe a male and a female singer singing, and I thought, wouldn't it be awesome to work with him? And I reached out to him, and I was very fortunate that he was available and willing to work on it for his first time working on a game. And he brought like a really incredible. His voice is amazing, but he also he set the music to this Norwegian poetry that added this extra layer of depth to it that I couldn't have thought of myself. And him being an expert in the subject, just that's one of the best things about working with musicians is you get to access their experiences and their the mastery that all the years they've put into their instrument. You get to harness that for a brief time.
So I've done some reading about kind of not orchestral, like choral elements to songs that a lot of times when it's sound, and forgive me because I don't have the terminology here, but if it's like, say for example, when you're going into Stormwind, it's this big momentous moment. You have the kind of the choir that's singing in the background, but that oftentimes in songs like that, the thinking is that the listener is not actually going to be able to understand, or maybe just not pay enough attention to the words that are being sung. So that oftentimes they'll just use like vowel sounds. Is that the case? And is that one of the reasons why having actual poetry in this work here that makes that more meaningful? I hope that makes sense. It's just kind of
Yeah,
these ideas
absolutely.
rattling around here.
No, and that's a great question. I always try to add lyrics, whether and they're rarely in English. In the case of the WoW stuff, there's Darnassian and all these different languages to draw from that. I get to work with the lore department at Blizzard and kind of ask them to translate ideas for me or to give me texts that might have been developed for different parts of the game, and I try to incorporate that because and I've always I started doing that at one point, thinking to myself, nobody's ever going to know that it's in there, but I'm going to know. And that's important to me, to know that there's this extra layer of depth in there that maybe someday someone will figure it out. And eventually people started figuring out. And now it's like you go on YouTube and there's, people talking about, oh, this was taken from this text and stuff, like it was, you know, like we put a whole lot more thought into it than we did. But I always try to incorporate something and kind of give it an extra depth. Like, I'll give you an example. The cinematic Arthas, my son, the opening cinematic for Wrath of the Lich King. There's the voiceover, and sort of the king is talking to his son, and the music is, you'll hear a boy soprano singing. Now the lyrics of the boy soprano are, he's singing about singing words from the coronation ceremony of his father. And so there's sort of this kind of juxtaposition of this king is talking to his son, who later went on to kill him. And then the music is kind of reenacting the coronation ceremony of when the king became king in the first place, and kind of saying like, "Long live the king! May his reign last forever!" That kind of thing. So you have those words happening in there that most people can't understand what they're saying, but maybe someone will figure it out later, and they eventually did figure it out that it was in there, and that makes it what was originally it just kind of I thought would be a cool idea to give it some extra depth. Now every time I write something for choir, I what can I use now? It's a fun challenge to do that.
That's awesome. I had no idea. I hadn't heard that, but having played through Wrath of the Lich King and heard all of that, just even hearing it now, it's like, oh my, you're kidding me, that's in there. That is such a cool thing. It's the little bits of discovery that people won't find out about, maybe even for a while, but when they do, it's like wow. It just adds that depth, not even just to the music, but to the game. It creates an impression about what that game is when that kind of thing happens.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun to do that, and even with Burning Crusade, the tagline from that was, "You are not prepared." Illidan keeps saying, "You are not prepared," and so in the lyrics, this is before I was using. It's the one time I used Latin, just because it was earlier on, and I hadn't really figured out how much of all the resources I had to be able to use other languages, but I put in Latin "para tu non es," which I think that's what it is, which means you are not prepared. So Illidan saying you are not prepared, and the choir is kind of echoing that in Latin. I thought that was kind of fun.
That's great. So after everything's done in a game, well, number one, are you a gamer? Do you play video games?
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I started out playing Atari 2600 games when I was a kid, and I love first person shooters, and I play a lot of Overwatch now, and it's a fun game. It's a great game. It's play with my daughter, and then Star Wars Battlefront, and I love playing games.
So after you've actually written the music or written the score for a game, do you ever go back in and see how it actually plays in there? I mean, even before the game comes out, I would think that would be something you'd want to do to see, well, what's the final product of this thing that I've been helping to create? Do you have those experiences after you've done the score, or do you kind of leave it to the developers?
I try to check in on it and see how it's going whenever I can. But the once I hand it off, I'm handing it off to people that know the game better than I do, and know I might have imagined the music in one way to be in one place, and they might hear it and say, oh, this would be better for this, and I kind of let them, they're the experts, and I let them do a lot of that. So I do enjoy when I do play the game. I really enjoy hearing how the music works in the game, and it does kind of help inform like how I'll work on it in the future. I always try to make adjustments to my style that I feel might make it more interesting of a playing experience.
Well, cool. Like I would only imagine, after it's in there, you'd want to go and, see for yourself, what that end product was. And, you're right though, because a team like that, they all have different areas of expertise. And, after you've done your part and created the music, it's all about that collaborative vision that you have. So, what do you play now? Like when you're not composing and writing, you said you like first person shooters. So what's your roster of games that we could find you playing, Neal?
Like I said, Overwatch and Star Wars Battlefront. I'm looking forward to the next Star Wars Battlefront. I'm a huge Star Wars fan. Um, Played the Far Cry series. The next one looks interesting. Um, yeah, I played a lot of StarCraft back in the day, and yeah, I mean that's I play Minecraft with my daughter, so
Oh yeah, yeah.
she's 11, so she's getting into games quite a bit now, and yeah, I mean I wish I had more time to play. To be honest, I work a lot, and what I do play, it's usually I'm looking for something that's not very involved that I can just kind of go in and blow some stuff up and then get out and
That's the truth.
yeah.
I have two toddlers at my house here, and I was always a PC gamer, and I still am. But I tell you, I love the PlayStation 4, how you can just hit a button and just suspend it. Because once you have kids and a very limited time to play, just being able to play for a few minutes and then stop is such a blessing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I used to play MMOs actually much more than I do now, but it's just so difficult to find the time to sit down and level a character in World of Warcraft to the level cap. I remember when I first started playing, I think I spent 300 hours to get my first character in Burning Crusade to the level cap, which is probably far too long. But I look at that now and I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I have 300 hours in an entire year to put
Yeah.
into a game. Well, that's
Yeah.
that's cool. Well, so Neal, I know we don't have a whole lot of time with you, so I just wanted to thank you again for coming and joining us here on the show. And where can we go to find out more about Rend and your body of work for listeners and viewers who might be interested?
You can find out about Rand at frostkeep.com, and you can also go to my website, nealacree.com. That's nealacree.com. And that's the best place to go, probably.
All right.
Or Twitter at Neal underscore Acree, or Frostkeeps on Twitter as well.
Awesome. Well, you hear that, everybody? Go follow Neal on Twitter, increase that follower count, and then every time you have a cue or something you want to share, we can all get that right away. Well, Neal, thank you again. It's such a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Chris. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Have a great night.
Thanks. You too.
All right, folks, that was Neal Acree. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back in just a few minutes, actually, with some other stuff going on, so we'll see you soon.